There is such an intersection, both, with AI and things like this, but then we also have 3D printers that can print organs, but they're also starting to print seeds. Is this anything that you've seen yet? Like in terms of like, are we going to see coffee beans being 3D printed rather than roasted?
I hope not. I really, really hope not. I've got to do that.
Hello and welcome to Food and Beverage Therapy Podcast, where we talk about leadership, entrepreneurship, and innovation in the coffee world. Learn from experts, CEOs, and leaders in the coffee industry on how they challenge themselves, continue to grow, innovate, and reinvent the landscape that makes up the business I love, coffee. I'm Jake Leonti, your host. I'm the cafe guru at F&B Therapy, consultant and entrepreneur, and I've worked at every link of the value chain over a 20-year career. I'm joined by my co-host, Andy Trindle-Mersch, another coffee expert with over 20 years in the business, and current VP of Coffee Operations and Sustainability at Phil's Coffee, as well as the board member at the Coalition for
Andy,
Racial
it's always
Equity.
great to see you. We're both on the road today. You're on site at a cafe, and I'm obviously like in a airport lounge here, but
Yeah, actually, I couldn't tell with your background, but cool. Yes, I'm at our Westboro Cafe for Phil's, which is a very popular store.
Very cool, very cool. So I appreciate you taking the time. Really, what I want to talk about is I just had a great conversation with Bill Murray, who was president of NCA, and one of the many interesting things that we talked about, because NCA, part of what they do is they're an advocate for the coffee industry, and so we're talking about all the different things that they've advocated for to keep the industry flowing, so to speak. And the new thing that's happening over in Europe right now is the deforestation rules and how that's going to affect coffee. And I don't know, have you been following that at all?
Following the headlines of what the law is and what the requirements are, yes. Not so much following, and I'm actually going to be fascinated to hear how Bill's talking about it and thinking about it for the NCA, because obviously it's not yet directly impacting, it doesn't impact the US market. And so he's focused on US consumption, but I'm very curious to find out what his expectations are for how it may come and start impacting in the US.
Yeah, we touched on a little bit. And for people who don't know, the EU's new deforestation regulation requires companies trading in cattle, cocoa, coffee, oil palm, rubber, and soya and wood and other products derived from these commodities to conduct extensive diligence on the value chain to ensure the goods do not result from, kind of recent deforestation. And so part of what that involves is like geo mapping and like extreme documentation and mapping of like the farms and where the products are coming from. So the main issue is that that's really difficult, and the time limit on it is very short. And so it kind of puts the burden on the coffee farmers to be able to suddenly have all of this tracking and mapping available, which is it's just unrealistic. So
can I interject? Would the burden be higher? I mean, I don't know, it's not easier for them either, but higher on exporters and then importers who want to sell the coffee, because they're the folks that, in order to meet the needs of their customers, they have to make sure the farmers have what they need. So
you would think they would do that, but at the same time, it's also like if you're one company and you're dealing with hundreds of farms, I mean, no matter what, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And they're trying to push this through pretty quickly. I think by the end of the year, or it's December 30th,
24, right?
24. Yeah. Okay, yeah, 2024 exactly. Yeah. So 1 year is still not a lot of time to map out like thousands of acres of land, and especially hard to get to areas. So kind of the way that Bill's looking at it is, yes, it's not a US issue yet, but they still want to be able to support the associations in Europe because we don't want it to become an issue,
Correct.
We want to sort of change it ahead of time. Yeah.
And I just had a weird thought that I don't know if this would be possible or true or not. If would there be a circumstance where we in the US, because we don't have these restrictions, we start getting the supply chain that is not usable in the European markets? So therefore, we're at risk if we care about these issues, because more of that coffee that is able to prove its traceability has to go to Europe. I'm just thinking about that right now, and I certainly wouldn't like to see that happen, right?
No, that sounds terrible.
Exactly. You will have the deforested coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah, just put it all in the U.S. We're okay with it.
Exactly. They don't care. They don't regulate.
Yeah, that's not a good rep, is it?
No.
Let's hope it doesn't go there. But I think, it's something everybody's watching, because obviously it's going to affect all the European companies. But at the same time, the idea of what they're trying to do is good, and it's obviously
Agreed.
it's
Yeah.
a virtuous endeavor, but it's just not taking into account, I think, the specific and individual needs of each of the industries. So
Yeah, do you know if they have any exception rules for, those farms where it really is very difficult? I don't know enough about the law to know that, but I wonder if they have an option for farmer groups or the exporter groups that are trying to buy from them to get an exception if they just can't be ready by December 2024.
I haven't heard that yet. That being said, I'm not a lawyer, and
Yeah, it's probably very long, the actual regulation.
I haven't read it in that level of depth. But it is a good point. So that's one of the major things. But this is kind of why we need the NCA, is like to look out for sort of regulations like this. And
100%.
we talk a little bit about, I think it was Prop 39, which you must know in California.
Are you talking?
Yeah.
Yes, I do know about that, but it's Prop 69, right?
69. Okay, cool. That's
69. Now that it used to be every coffee shop you went into, the signs were always there. They're not anymore, which is great, but it actually means I'm starting to forget the number. I think that's a good thing.
That is a good thing.
Not
Yeah.
as top of mind. Yes. Yeah.
Because I remember when we were trying to one of my clients, we were trying to sell coffee in California from a New York company, and they were starting to require like the national chains were starting to require that you put it on the bag. And I was like, this can't be good.
It's so stupid. And it's just not even based on the science, right? So it was very ridiculous.
Exactly. So those are exactly the kind of things that they kind of protect us from, which is I think important.
I'm a big fan of the NCA and the work they do, and you've brought up two great examples, but for sure the Prop 69, which was, they were instrumental in a many-year battle of like kind of reversing that. So I am a fan. And then exactly, like, we need an organization like them who can keep track of the regulations. I mean, it's impossible to do from my seat, in a coffee company trying to oversee manufacturing, trying to oversee coffee quality, all these things. There's not capacity. So yeah, I just want to put in a little plug for the work that Bill and his team do there for the industry. Yeah.
Agree. Yeah, hugely important. And, one of the things that I brought up, which is maybe me being more paranoid, but I don't know if you've been paying attention to like lab grown meat and how that's recently been approved.
Yes, and there's lab grown coffee.
That's what I was going to ask. That's what
Yes.
So there is lab grown coffee that's happening.
Yes. I actually took a meeting with someone who is making a product a while back and tasted some of her samples, and she's actually just recently been in touch again. And I think I believe we are going to be meeting at our roasting plant in about 2 weeks, just so she can update me on the work she's doing and what they're about.
Wow. You're going to have to give me an update on that, because I'm seriously interested, because I started thinking like, of course they're going to do that. They're 3D printing organs for transplants. So it's only a matter of time before they start 3D printing coffee beans as well.
Yeah. Maybe they can just like brain numb us into thinking we had it, but we never had it. And then there's like, I don't know. You had a cup of coffee, but you didn't actually. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, just tell my brain that I had coffee. I don't actually consume it. I just want the effects.
Yeah. No, it's I'm very mixed on this one, because one, she's really nice. Another person that I really admire in the industry put me in touch with her this second time and just suggested I speak to her to understand, not to consider it for fills or anything, but just to learn. And I definitely am interested, but I'm very mixed because obviously I'm a lover of actual coffee. And I'm a lover of coffee farmers and coffee farms. And so it's very hard to sometimes think about like how there may be an environmental benefit to something that on the other hand is not a social benefit to the coffee farming community. So it's an interesting one.
And not a benefit, I think, maybe, and I have without having tried it, but anytime there's a copy of a copy, it gets degraded on some level. So it's like our enjoyment of everything is at stake here. It's like if lab grown meat is obviously not going to be as good. I mean, maybe I'll be wrong, but
I'm going to get you in connection with this person and get you some samples so you can at least start like me just learning, because in the same way that the NCA tries to keep up on things, good for us to keep up to. Is Bill, sorry, to go back to your point, did you discuss this with Bill and is he paying attention to it?
I brought it up to Bill, and he did not seem, as you'll hear in the episode, he did not seem like aware of it. So I might have to bring it up to him, because I was like, that's something that we got to talk about.
Okay, I'm going to definitely make sure you're in touch with her so that you can get that information out there. Yeah.
Hey, this is why we do this. We're exchanging right here. It's important stuff.
Just all the more things we need to learn about.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's hear what Bill has to say about it.
Awesome.
Hello and welcome. This is Food and Beverage Therapy Podcast, and I'm here with my esteemed guest today, Bill Murray of the National Coffee Association, also known as the NCA. Hello and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Jake. It's great to be here.
Thanks a lot. How's it going today?
Yeah, pretty good, actually. I lost my internet connection yesterday, but it came back just in time. So I think we're in good shape. And
there you go. It's a blessed moment. We were meant to speak today.
It is. And a cup of coffee, my internet, and a podcast. So what more can I ask for?
Exactly. And that kind of leads me to my first question, which is what's your morning coffee routine?
Oh, it's a black coffee. It's I've got a grind and brew machine, and I love the whole thing. The music of the coffee beans being ground, the aroma, the whole thing. I'm all the way in. And I would tell you where my favorite coffee comes from, but I love all my children equally at the NCA, so I don't want to pick favorites.
I feel the same way. I can't pick origins. I can't pick companies. It's like, because it's also a mood, right? It's like how you feeling that day, what's fresh that day, the whole thing.
Exactly.
But you go with the fresh grind and brew in the morning, and then do you hit the coffee again in the afternoon, or is it just one for you?
No, 2 cups in the morning and 2 cups after lunch, and that keeps me happy.
There you go. It's pretty solid. Are you one of those people that can drink coffee after dinner?
Not too often. It all depends, if I'm out on the road and it's been a really long day, absolutely an espresso and I'll drop off to sleep. Well, but not usually, no.
Fair enough. I'm the same way. I can't really drink coffee after 3:00 if I expect to go to bed that night. But if I've gone on some sort of lavish steak dinner and there was alcohol involved, then maybe you can have a little espresso or something just to digest properly.
Exactly.
You were the executive vice president of the MPAA, which is the Motion Picture Association of America, in Los Angeles. And I used to work in film actually, and lived in LA for some years as well. Wow. But I thought it was very interesting because I'm like, what got you into coffee? How did you get roped into the coffee world?
Well, yeah, if you want to talk about career, my path has been unusual, but looking back, it all makes perfect sense. Although in the middle of it, it never did. I worked in the motion picture industry for 22 years, wow. And the industry was in the midst of a transformation. So moving from the analog world to the digital world. And after that, I went to the Public Relations Society. Similarly, an entire sector, a profession that was trying to understand how the impact of digital technology was going to change what they did for a living. They were opposite ends of the spectrum. In the movie business, The whole job was to prevent digital technology from taking over the content. They want to control content. In the PR business, it's exactly the opposite. Every PR professional, they wanted their content to go viral. So digital was a blessing. And then the coffee position opened up. I saw a posting and I thought, this looks kind of interesting. The more I looked at the association, the more I thought I can make a contribution. I like coffee. I believe in what they do. And then it got really interesting, Chick. I went to an interview, and the two guys that were interviewing me, they looked at me and they said, "You're not a coffee guy. We want a coffee guy. Why should we hire you?" And basically what I said was, you've got 20,000 coffee people already. You've got all these companies you work with. The question is really for you guys, what do you want to do with your association? Do you want to take it in different directions? Do you want to maybe take lessons from other sectors? Or do you want to stay right on track with where you are? And the way they answered that question was, well, the coffee's changing, the association should be changing. Let's do something different. And here I am 9 years later.
Brilliant. Yeah. I mean, so like you said, basically coffee, same direction. If we go with a coffee guy, then we're going to just keep doing the same thing and kind of repeating ourselves, and maybe even get involved in some special interests, because you're going to shift it based on your company if you're bringing in somebody from another company already. But hiring somebody from the outside, fresh perspective, a career and lessons from other industries, I think that's really interesting and a progressive choice by the NCA hiring board. So that's pretty amazing. And how do you see, because I feel like we're at a threshold right now in coffee, there's a big transition, whether it's between automation and, the manual pass, also the friction between how the industry is being run, more sustainability, more transparency, like these types of things coming to the forefront, but then people still wanting to push against that and sort of work things the old ways. Where do you see us now in the industry in terms of a transition?
Oh, what a great question. I love these kind of open-ended questions. I think one of the great things about coffee is it can be everything to everybody. You mentioned we were talking a little bit before we started here. They used to live in New York. I used to live in New York also. We talk a lot about the specialty revolution, but sometimes I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to Newark Airport. Who else is up at 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning? The coffee cart people, right? You'd see these guys pull up, hardworking folks, typically immigrants. You're not going to get a cup of specialty coffee from a coffee cart typically at 5 o'clock in the morning. But folks need that. They need a relatively affordable cup of coffee that they can grab and go. There's a whole sector happening here. So I think everything you said is exactly right. I think big picture, we're going to see more regulation, more interest in verification of traceability, supply chain issues. It's where everything is moving for all sorts of reasons that we can talk about. But I think wherever you are on the coffee spectrum, whether you're a value coffee on a coffee cart, whether you're a specialty coffee, this issue of traceability, of responsibility, of the environment, there's going to be an intersection between what consumers say they want, what regulators are going to be asking for, and then the question of who pays for what is a huge question. So I see all these pressures on the business. Where it's going, I don't have a crystal ball per se.
Absolutely. No, it makes sense. And it's just that I think, again, there is such an intersection, both, with AI and things like this, but then we also have 3D printers that can print organs, but they're also starting to print seeds. Is this anything that you've seen yet? Like in terms of like, are we going to see coffee beans being 3D printed rather than roasted?
I hope not. I really, really hope not. I've not seen it. Why do I hope not? There are 25 million coffee farmers around the world, right? I mean, we depend on them and they depend on us. there are health issues. I mean, coffee is probably one of the foods that has been more studied by doctors and researchers than just about anything else that you eat. And the research over and over again says really good things about coffee. I don't watch your caffeine. We were talking about that a minute ago, right? You print something 3D. What's it in it? What's its impact on you? How much energy is it taking to print that? So I hope we don't see 3D printing. I really don't.
Agreed. I'm with you on that for sure. Are there aspects of working in the motion picture industry that kind of crossed over into coffee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big part of what we do at the National Coffee Association is what we call advocacy work. And a lot of folks don't really understand what that means. What is that? You guys are advocates. We speak up on behalf of the industry. We look at what the research says. We look at the statistics, and we try to make sure that there's honest and accurate information available about coffee or whatever the issue is, whether it's in Washington or with the media. I'll give you a good example. We were talking about caffeine. Maybe 6, 8 years ago, consumers were able to purchase bulk powdered caffeine on Amazon. And a couple of people bought bulk caffeine. They put some in a glass of water, they drank it, and they died.
Wow.
There were questions from regulators about whether caffeine should be regulated. And one of the conversations was, should we put warning labels on coffee cups? There's caffeine in my coffee. We went to Washington and we talked to regulators about this. We said, look, caffeine is caffeine. The chemical composition is no different. But the caffeine in a cup of coffee and the caffeine in a bag full of synthetic caffeine that you purchase in bulk, these are completely different animals. And if you're going to mandate putting caffeine labels on coffee cups, you're taking us in a place that isn't necessary. It's going to be costly. It's going to scare people, quite frankly, that cup of coffee in the morning that has beneficial health impacts, right? They may think twice about drinking that coffee. So that's what advocacy is. It's look at an issue, and it's not a lot of slick public relations. It's what does the research say? What's the reality of the business? So we certainly did that in the movie business. There were copyright issues. There were concerns over content, media, violence, and other things like that. And so learning how to speak clearly, factually, directly about the issues you're concerned about, directly transferable from the movie business.
Very interesting. I always knew that the NCA was part of kind of, maybe lobbying for government and, like you said, advocacy, which is a crucial function that I don't believe that there's another group doing that for our industry specifically. So when you went to bat about the caffeine regulation, was there any sort of crossover? Because I believe there was something like this in California as well with Prop 39, and they started putting, I think they even forced Starbucks to put it on their packaging that it may have carcinogens or because they do that with everything in California.
You've got a great memory. You're exactly right. There was a proposition in California, and here's what it said. If there's something in whatever this product is that could potentially cause cancer, you got to put a cancer label on it. Now, this thing is run amok, this proposition. And what happened in California in particular is that the way the law was written, individuals could bring lawsuits on behalf of the state and force you to put these labels on different products. Sometimes you'll purchase something, from Amazon, Christmas lights, and you'll pick up a string of lights and it'll say, warning, there's something in this product that's known by the state of California to cause cancer. You're not going to eat the Christmas lights. You're not going to put them in a food processor. You're not going to rub them all over your. But that's what the law says, right? It's kind of ridiculous. So what we did was we started working on getting all the research together and taking that to lawmakers in California, taking it to the regulators, going to Sacramento. I went personally to testify in front of a board of regulators, and the message was very simple. Coffee is this incredible thing with literally hundreds of chemical compounds in it. It's not any one of these compounds. It is coffee. And coffee, not only does coffee not cause cancer, coffee actually seems to prevent a number of different types of cancer. So our job was to get that research, was to interpret it very clearly, to summarize it, to present it. And eventually, the state of California created an exemption specifically for coffee from the regulation. I guess, Jake, it's a little bit like this. Coffee has water in it. If you stuck your head in a bathtub full of water, you would drown. But you don't do that. You don't put a warning label on your coffee that says, warning, there's water in here. And if you stick your head in the bathtub, you'll drown. You just drink your coffee because it's coffee, and you do different things with it than a bathtub full of water. And that's what that proposition in California kind of did. It was, if there's something in here that just remotely could be a problem, then we're going to condemn the whole thing and put advisories on it. So that's a great example of the work that we do.
Absolutely. And that prop is definitely overreaching in many ways. I mean, like, even you go into an elevator and it's a warning about the paint in the elevator and like you're going to get cancer. So it can't be good for the psyche, to constantly think that whatever you're doing is going to give you cancer. But it does happen. And so I think that that's great, because I remember that being a hurdle. And it was interesting too, because, recently, I can't remember what year it was, maybe it was 2016, 2018, coffee finally got placed on the, recommended food list of the Surgeon General. And was that also due to NCA and kind of work you guys were doing?
Yeah. So there are a couple of different mechanisms or opportunities. One of them is what's called the dietary guidelines for Americans. You might remember the food pyramid many years ago, or the My Plate. So what happens is every 5 years, the government sets up a panel of experts. They look at what we're eating and what we're not eating, like our vegetables, and they make recommendations. And they say, okay, this is what we should all be doing. Sometimes they look at this from the perspective of a particular question, type 2 diabetes or obesity or something like that. So what we've done every time there's been an opportunity is gathered up the research and submitted it officially to the government, saying we think coffee should be recognized as a part of a healthy diet. So we did that in 2015 for the dietary guidelines. We did it in 2020. And we're in the middle of that right now for the 2025 guidelines. There's two other things that are happening at the exact same time. The FDA is looking at the definition of healthy with respect to food. There's a specific legal definition. And what's happened is, over the years, research has given us a new way to think about healthy. For example, years ago, when the FDA last looked at this, you could not label a piece of salmon fish as healthy because it had a high fat content. It wasn't understood that there are good fats and there are bad fats, right? So the FDA is saying the research has changed. We've learned a lot of different things. Let's update the definition. So they're looking at whether or not coffee should specifically be allowed to carry a healthy label. And we've weighed in here also type 2 diabetes, obesity, liver cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, Alzheimer's disease. The research is quite extensive, showing beneficial effects here. So we're really hoping the next year or so there'll be an even greater recognition about the health benefits of coffee. And people then will have more information and better information about the choices they make every day.
I think that's amazing. I mean, the being on the recommended food list, I think it was a huge win for coffee, and everybody wanted to push that. And then you also see a trend of functional ingredients happening in coffee as well. And I imagine that that has to do with each other. You know, that suddenly the health space is willing to connect and lock in with coffee because we're also healthy. So it's like, why wouldn't you have my superfood with your superfood? And I don't know if you guys are also doing things for cascara, which is obviously a byproduct of coffee, the cherry skin, which I believe also has a lot of antioxidants and things that can help with free radicals. Do you get involved in that as like an extension of the coffee product?
It's funny. I love these questions, and this is what's great about your podcast. I mean, you're just like deep in coffee, which leads to really good conversation. This is almost a philosophical question for an association like the National Coffee Association, right? What do we touch? What do we not touch?
Right.
And right now, we are almost exclusively focused on coffee itself, not whiteners, not sweeteners, not the additives. There are a lot of questions about whether we could or should get into these areas. Right now, we're not, and I think a good example is the question about sugar. A lot of people put sweeteners and sugar in their coffee, and that has the potential to impact the health benefits of coffee. Now, so far, all the research as it doesn't. Typically people might put 2 teaspoons of sugar in 8 to 10 ounces, 12 ounces of coffee. So for the most part, the research says it doesn't matter how you take your coffee, as long as you're drinking coffee, it's good for you. But we haven't gotten into the sugar question or the added antioxidants or the added mushrooms. It's funny, Jake, we do research every year and we ask people, what are you putting in your coffee? And consistently, year after year, 1 to 2% of all consumers say they put alcohol in their coffee. Now, yeah, right now, is that because they're having an Irish coffee in a lovely restaurant at 10 o'clock on a Saturday? Or is it because they get up in the morning and put a couple of shots of Jack in their coffee before they go off to work? I don't know. We don't ask, right? And, one of them you might think, well, that's a nice way to end a lovely dinner. Another one you might think, that's not good. We don't get into those questions.
Yeah, that's where health becomes a matter of opinion, right? But I am curious though about the cascara because it is part of the plant, so does that fall under the realm of coffee, or are you keeping that separate?
Yeah, so far we're keeping it separate. I think it's really interesting, and it's interesting for a couple of reasons. I think if coffee farmers have additional opportunities to market what traditionally have been byproducts from the process, I think that can only help coffee farmers, the value chain, and everything that we care about. You've been to Origin. You'll see a lot of these regenerative mills where the byproducts are composted. They're used to fuel dryers and things like that. I think that's part of the evolution. There's an opportunity to take the cascara, make it food grade, treat it as a product, as a sweetener, as a flavor agent, and a lot of potential here. But we haven't gotten into it.
Eventually we'll have to broaden out into the outer fruit of the bean. Yeah.
Maybe that's the way we go. Like sugar and sweeteners and Jack Daniels are way down the road. We're still within the bean. So that's
let's
good.
just stay on the tree for now.
Sure, you're right. Right.
I like it. And so it's really interesting, again, like getting us on the Surgeon General list, getting us off of Prop 39. Advocacy is very important, but and you keep mentioning a lot of research. So is this research that the NCA is doing themselves? You're working with third parties, and then does this get funded through membership of the NCA, or how does that piece of it all work?
Well, another good question. We, with a very limited number of exceptions, we do not fund research, and that's beneficial for a couple of reasons. research, especially health-related research and medical research, it can be wildly expensive. I mean, by the time you get groups of people together and you set up control groups and you've medical professionals, it's prohibitively expensive. But the other issue, which is really connecting more to the advocacy discussion, is when we don't pay for the research, it's what I refer to as independent, right? We haven't influenced it. We didn't tell the researcher what to do. And that helps us make a more powerful representation, whether we're speaking with the media, with regulators, with government, with the FDA. It's one thing for me to say, look at the research we paid for and what we concluded. It's a whole nother thing for me to say, look at what these 50 researchers whom I've never spoken to and don't know have concluded about coffee. So there are a couple of advantages to not funding this research. One is it keeps our budget down, but the other is the research can speak for itself, and it always says good things about coffee.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes more sense, yeah, to have that kind of autonomous arm. It makes it more pure. But I'm curious, why are they researching in the first place? What are they, what is the interest of these scientists that are focusing on coffee then?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Scientists that are interested in doing something relevant and having an impact. You look at what the statistics tell us about coffee in the U.S. Coffee is the most popularly consumed beverage in the U.S., more than tap water. Almost 3/4 of Americans drink coffee on a weekly basis. So if you're a researcher and you want to come up with something that has broad implications, coffee is a great place to start. And that's why I think a lot of researchers look at coffee, because it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's around the world. And they want to get headlines for the research. They want to get funding from governments, from the universities, for their research. And so if they're able to say, I'm going to do something about coffee, and it has broad implications, and it's really relevant, and coffee's widely accessible in every community and every price point, they're more likely to get their money, get a headline, and get some attention at the end of the day.
That makes a lot of sense. And so going back to kind of our definitions of coffee and the realm in which the NCA focuses, there's a lot of products that have been popping up that are using name recognition of coffee to gain popularity, like Atomo, things like this, they're not actually coffee. Even mushroom coffee, which, mushroom, sometimes it's blended with coffee, but sometimes it's just mushrooms and they still call it mushroom coffee. So I'm very curious, is this something that we're thinking about or working towards sort of defining more clearly, what is coffee, and then being able to protect that so that way other industries aren't trying to sort of draft on the popularity of our beverage?
I think from our perspective, coffee is what we've always understood coffee to be. It comes off of a tree. I think our audience knows what it is we're talking about here. I think what we really have to do is a massive push for education for consumers. One of the interesting things about coffee is everybody in this country, everybody everywhere thinks they know coffee, right? Even if they're not coffee drinkers, if they're 25% of the country that don't drink coffee, they know someone, they can smell it, they can identify it. Yet they don't really know coffee. They don't know where it comes from. They don't know that it grows on a tree. They don't know as much about the health benefits as they should know. So I think what our job really needs to be is, rather than focusing on these pseudo coffee things that are coming along, is to work to better educate consumers, make sure they understand that they're connecting to coffee farmers, to an industry that's pushing very hard in the sustainability and the environmental sector, that coffee's really good for them. It's been studied forever, and they'll let them make their decisions. about what they want to do based upon a better understanding of what coffee really is. But I would just agree with you. Like, those other things aren't coffee. They can call it whatever they want. Coffee comes from trees and has for thousands of years.
I was just curious if you felt that that was damaging at all to the brand that is coffee in general, or if it doesn't seem to really be an issue.
I don't think so. And I also think, we're going to have to see where this whole movement goes. I mean, if you look at some of the artificial meat products that are out there, huge initial excitement and that, and not so much, all sorts of huge business issues and market issues for a lot of those companies. So I think we're just going to have to see if this is all really a thing. But that's kind of separate. We just need to keep speaking up on behalf of real coffee, like you do with your podcast, like we do in Washington, and like the people that we represent do every day.
What do you see as being like kind of the biggest issue facing the coffee industry right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue right now is a pressing need for greater traceability along the supply chain in the sector. We, as an industry, as a global industry, we are pretty far ahead of most other commodity sectors in terms of the sustainability work, the certification work. I'm not suggesting for a second that these things are perfect and that they're answers. It's that the industry has put a lot of energy into looking for solutions and to trying to improve, and that process continues. If you look at the recent legislation that was approved in Europe, companies have to map where their coffee comes from down to specific geo coordinates at origin. And in some cases, that's just not possible. And where that pain is going to be felt most is by the little coffee farmers that we care about. Large coffee farms, a lot of investors and a lot of technology, they're going to be able to give their customers all sorts of geolocation information, all sorts of compliance data. But the little farmer in Indonesia with 3 hectares, he can't even have this conversation yet. So I think the questions that are being asked right now is, how closer can we get to better traceability? Where is traceability right now? All the companies that I work with, they can tell you their coffee comes from a certain region, a certain area, sometimes a certain farm, but then it gets to the mill. And this, it gets to the mill and it gets processed and mixed. So we all have a certain grade or a certain bean type in a certain batch. So by the time that container comes up here, there may be coffee in that 40-foot container at the Port of Elizabeth from 400 different coffee farmers. It's almost impossible at that point to say, okay, we know exactly where each of these little bits came from. So I think there's some interesting things happening technologically. You have people looking at the DNA and the other composition of coffee to map it to a particular origin using a trace analysis. You have other companies looking at technological solutions. But we're all going to have to do more of this into the future. It's going to take investment. It's going to be costly. It's going to take education at origin. And ultimately, someone's got to pay for it. So I think this is one of the big issues that the whole sector is facing.
I mean, okay, so I understand the idea of traceability in general and why it's important to us. Why do you believe that the kind of EU is making this new requirement?
It's not really the what's referred to in these circles phytosanitary. It's not really a health issue or a traceability for an outbreak of foodborne illness. It's really linked to questions of deforestation and climate change. The difficulty is when regulators are looking at big issues like this, first of all, they don't understand individual sectors. They don't really understand cotton or soybeans or coffee. So they tend to try to come up with big picture solutions for everybody. And in this case, I think in theory, the regulators are saying we want to make sure that all the commodities and the food products that we bring into the European Union, that they have not been the product of illegally deforested land. And at a very high level, that's a laudable objective. But when you get down into the individual commodities, they're very, very different. I mean, I was in Brazil 6 weeks ago. I was in Espírito Santo. I was looking at the work they're doing. It's absolutely incredible the amount of data they have on each individual farmer's plot, on the regulatory process for that farmer to be able to push into a different portion of his land and do something differently. The truth is, coffee farmers are not out there in the Amazon bulldozing and planting hundreds of acres of coffee in the Amazon. That's not the environment for coffee. That's not what's happening. But a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't make those distinctions. So again, it comes back to the advocacy and education issue. We have to make sure that our regulators understand that coffee is different. We're not beef cattle. We're not palm. We're not soy. Coffee farmers plant trees that don't produce for 3 years. They're not out there chopping everything down. And then once that investment is made in those 3 years, that tree can produce for years and years after that. So the farmer has an interest in keeping that tree healthy and productive. Right? So our job is to get out there and make sure regulators understand coffee's different. Second, that the industry has a commitment through all kinds of programs, individual company programs, pre-competitive programs. And then the last question is, how can industry and government work together? You know, for the government to simply say, you've got to tell us exactly where every coffee bean came from, that's not a partnership towards a solution. You know, are there opportunities for more investment in research to help coffee farmers with agronomy assistance and things like that? So that's what I think is happening, where we need to take this. And this is another one of these types of issues, which for the future is something we're going to be putting a lot of energy into.
Again, everything you've been saying today is very interesting, so I appreciate it. So basically what they did is they just lumped coffee in with other commodities, and that's the regulation that they're asking for. It's not because they're specifically concerned about coffee and need this geo mapping for that specific reason. Okay, and so are you and is the NCA kind of looking to help communicate these things to the European Union because of the fact that, like, you know, one, it's good for coffee in general, but two, you know, you don't want those ideas to sort of spread and get us lumped in over here in some regulation as well?
You know, Jake, I love loving this conversation. Like, just over a cup of coffee would have been great, not just a podcast too, you know. So really good question. We don't work directly in Europe. What we do is we work with other associations, sort of sister organizations. So there's the Swiss Coffee Trading Association, there's the European Coffee Federation, there's the British Coffee Association, and I'm in touch with my counterparts on a regular basis, but they do that work in Brussels and London, in Switzerland. What we're doing is we're working in Washington to try to get ahead of the discussion that might come here. You know, your last point was exactly right. You know, regulators in Washington are looking at what's happening in Europe. You know, they're asking themselves the question, shouldn't we do what they're doing over there? So I was in Washington just 3 weeks ago, meeting with lawmakers and regulators and their staff at the State Department, different congressional delegations, and literally having this discussion. The additional piece of this discussion, these guys all need to have a better understanding of why coffee is important to the U.S. economy, why it's important to a specific congressional delegation. If you speak to lawmakers from Hawaii, and, you know, I know our hearts all go out to the folks in Hawaii right now, they get coffee. They're like, oh yeah, coffee's important to our economy. We know why we should care. But when you speak to a representative from South Carolina, he doesn't have that appreciation. So the conversation has to start with, did you know a lot of coffee's coming through Charleston? Did you know that there are warehouses? People are working in those warehouses right up from the port. Do you know that there's a national grocer's got a roasting facility? Huge. Just outside. Do you know that all these people work in the sector? Do you know that your constituents are deeply connected to the coffee sector, not just as coffee drinkers, but as workers, as business owners? And that's how you get their attention, with facts, the information. Like, well, we didn't know that. So now let's talk about why these other issues, deforestation, the health issue, why these should concern you as a regulator, as an elected lawmaker. So those are the types of conversations that I've been having personally with lawmakers and regulators over the last couple of months.
Is there any sort of specific issue that you're working on right now that's maybe like a difficult problem that you haven't fully solved yet?
This is why I love coffee. When I worked in the movie business, there were some really hard issues. Lawmakers were upset about all these violent movies and sex in movies and smoking in movies. And I couldn't do anything about that, right? I mean, artists have their right to express themselves. Coffee's really different. I mean, I much more see my job as to take the facts, take the information, and to make an argument that is supported by research, by data, by statistics. So I think if we can just get our message out, and that becomes a resource question. How many people can you visit? How many folks can you talk to? Which is another reason I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Jake, because the more folks that hear about what we're doing and understand, sometimes people think these lobbyists in Washington, smoke-filled rooms, and that's not what we do.
Not with coffee, people. Come on.
Yeah.
I think that's great. I mean, again, so it comes down to communication and getting the word out there, education through it all. And I think that's something that everybody in every industry is really finding a challenge and is trying to focus on and trying to cut through the noise, which is really hard. So I appreciate you being here speaking with me. One of the things that I thought was interesting that goes to your point is some of the resources that are coming up on your website, like the new Cold Brew Resource Center, which has cold brew safety guide for retailers and compliance checklists and HACCP plan, because when I've been working specifically on cold brew projects for at least 10 years and in Europe as well as in the US. And it's kind of been a little bit of the Wild West, it's been grossly unregulated for a long time. I'm sure you've been to cafes where you see the buckets and it looks like a mess and they're on the floor. And, it took like 8 years just to get them to move the bucket off the floor and have to put it on something. And so having something like this, I have to say, is a great resource, and it's going to elevate, the expectation and the quality of cold brew itself. And I think it's a great to create this step first, because Department of Health hasn't even necessarily truly defined what they expect from a cold brew operation within a cafe, at least in most states. So having this and being the first step of saying like, this is the standard of how coffee should be, done in cold brew format, I think is a great way to take the power back as well and not just leave it up to Department of Health in individual cities and states.
Jake, this is another example of why I am so enjoying this conversation. Specifically, what has been happening is we are getting emails from the departments of health in these different jurisdictions. And the contact us is my health inspectors are out there in the field. They don't know what to do when they look at cold brew. Mm-hmm. What should they be asking? What do you people know about good safety practices? Here's a question that should be a simple question, but it's not a simple question. The coffee shop makes a batch of cold brew in the shop. They steep it overnight. How long can they keep it before it's no longer safe to serve to customers. 2 days, 6 days, 10 days, 2 weeks. And whatever you think it might be, how can you substantiate that? So imagine that you're running a coffee shop, and over a period of a month or 2 months, 3 different health inspectors come in, and they each reach a different conclusion about how long you can be holding your in-shop cold brew from a safety perspective. What do? Right? So we commissioned from an independent laboratory a set of tests. These tests look at how long you can safely keep cold brew in a shop environment. We're in the process right now publishing these results, making them available. So now 2 things have happened. If you have these results, you know that if you're taking all the proper safety precautions, washing your hands and cleaning your bucket, you can keep your cold brew safely for 10 days. Okay. But even better, when the health inspector shows up and he or she says, Jake, how long have you had that there? Well, 9 days. Well, I don't think you should be keeping that 9 days. Well, let me show you the independent research that was done that shows that we're well within the margin of error and safety for shop-produced cold brew. Here's a report. And when everybody shows all the health inspectors the exact same report, now you start to create a better understanding, better awareness, and better protection for both the shops and the people that are drinking cold brew. This study will probably cost us, when we're all done, close to $200,000. And, we absorb the cost, spread it over the cost of the membership, and we make it available along with the other resources. So you're going to see a lot more of this. This is how we look at, what we refer to as the value proposition of membership in the association.
I think it's incredible also because it's, it sounds like a lot of money, 200,000 for the study, but if you look at the value of cold brew, it's its own industry at this point,
Yes.
So the investment is well worth it. My only thing is that, please tell me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that NCA traditionally, most of the members are like larger coffee companies, so do you get a lot of individual coffee shop members that are participating?
Yeah, so we have about 200. So first of all, that's not true. Let me just address that quickly and specifically.
Thank
We
you
have
for
about
correcting me.
270 members of all different types. Certainly, we have the larger companies. Dues are structured on a size of business scale. So right now, if you are a individual coffee shop, you can join the association for $725. And that gives you access to all the kinds of research that we're talking about and all of the other benefits. If you are a large national company, you're paying a healthy 6 figures to belong to this association. So what's really happening is the large companies are subsidizing very heavily tools for the benefit of small shops and individual operators, because ultimately it's in everybody's interest to have a healthy, honest, truthful, transparent industry. So that's how we've structured it from a business model perspective, and everybody's welcome at the association.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for illuminating me on that, because that was my misunderstanding. And because I was going to say, the true value of this is for the independent coffee shop. It is for the smaller chains. So what a great investment to make for maybe the minority, but it sounds like you have a healthy membership in that sector as well. So that's wonderful.
And we'd love to have more. So, folks, send us an email, tell them Jake sent you, and we'll see what we can do for you.
Absolutely. And I want to make the point too that NCA is very much different than the SCA, and in terms of its mission and what it's actually doing. And that's why I wanted to bring up the advocacy part so much as well, because I mean, that's a huge part of what you guys are doing, and kind of paving the way and keeping it an open, safe space for us to operate and be able to, transact with coffee around the country. So that's a huge value for the industry. And I think that's really important to state.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. That is, I would say, at the risk of oversimplifying, I think the SCA is much more about the sensory aspects of coffee and the art of coffee, and we're about the business of coffee. And I'm in touch with Giannis, my counterpart at SCA, and we work together where it makes sense. So we're allies in the big picture.
Allies in the big picture. I like that. And I noticed that too on one of the recent trend reports that you guys kind of joined forces on your research data, which is really nice. And I think maybe one last point that I wanted to bring up was just to see, what are you seeing that is kind of, we've talked about like what some of the issues are, some of the things that you're advocating for coffee, but what are some of the kind of the bright things that are on the horizon for coffee?
Yeah, I can't emphasize the health issue enough. In three separate requests for information, the federal government has specifically asked about coffee and health. They asked about this with the FDA redefinition of healthy. They asked about this separately with respect to this question of the dietary guidelines, and they asked this question again with respect to package labeling. And so what happens is there's a long notice in the Federal Register, the official document of the government, and they'll ask for input. And very often they'll pose specific questions. They're asking about coffee specifically. Should we designate coffee as a healthy beverage? Should coffee be specifically or explicitly recognized as part of a healthy diet? Should coffee have labeling on the package to talk about the health aspects of coffee? Sometimes when people are asking a question, the question telegraphs what they're thinking, right? And I think that's what's happening here. I think after nearly a decade of driving home the message that coffee's healthy, the government in different areas is sitting up and asking the question, should we be doing more to recognize, acknowledge, and promote this? I am really hopeful, Jake, that in the next, I would say, year to 18 months, we're going to see more official recognitions of coffee as healthy. And this is going to start to change how companies are positioning coffee carefully and realistically. You're not going to see a commercial saying drink coffee and don't get cancer, but you are going to see much more in the way of educational communication. Coffee can be part of your healthy diet. Coffee can be good for you. Coffee drinkers will live longer, according to different research that's out there. So I think as we were talking earlier, there's such an interest in lifestyle and healthy living and what people are eating right now, along generational lines, that these designations could really be game changers for the whole sector. So this is where I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to see some big advances in terms of recognition of what coffee really does when you drink it.
That's really exciting news, especially because I think, one of the largest industries in the US is healthcare. And, so beyond even just our own personal interest in healthy living, anytime that you're in a section that is like going towards the national agenda, I mean, that has to be a positive thing in terms of, just making our lives easier to operate again as businesses in the US.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Bill Murray, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate all of your expertise and being open with me in this transaction. And as you said, the NCA, part of their values is community, and I'm definitely feeling that today. And also, I see that with tools like this cold brew workshop and all the things that you're providing now, and it's helping bring the community together. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And again, I really appreciate your time speaking with me today.
Jake, thank you. I really enjoyed this. If you'd like to get to know our community a little better, our convention will be March 7th and 9th in Nashville. I'd like to invite you to be our guest. Come on down. Nashville's a great city, and meet the hundreds of folks who make up the NCA.
Amazing. March 7th through 9th at Nashville this year. So you guys always do them in cool locations. So I think that sounds like a lot of fun. It's not too far for me as well. Yeah, I'd love to come to the show.
Excellent. Hope to see you in Nashville. Thanks.
Sounds good. Take care.
If you like what you heard, please subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts. A very special thanks to our guest, Bill Murray. Thanks as always for your support and listening. Please feel free to share this with a friend and get more people to listen. Always love to hear feedback and interesting ideas. If you have a guest that you think would be perfect for our show and you'd like to hear interviewed, please feel free to hit us up at info@fnbtherapy.com. Thanks and take care.